bomb him into submission. Well, we turn now to an interview with Anthony Shadid, New York Times Middle East correspondent, one of 4 New York Times reporters who were captured in Libya last month by Gaddafi's forces. They were held for nearly a week, often beaten and abused, at times their lives threatened. They were released 2 weeks ago Monday. Anthony Shadid is a twice Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who's covered the recent uprisings across the Middle East. We last spoke in January about the Tunisian protests. I spoke to him yesterday in Boston and started by asking him to describe where he and his colleagues were at the time they were captured.
You know, we were in, a day before I had gone back to Benghazi. I'd been covering the fighting at, I guess what you'd describe as the front in Libya, and I'd gone back to Benghazi, and I'd come that morning to a town called Ashdabia because I think there was a sense, and at least I had the sense that this battle for this town might prove decisive somehow, that how that battle went would determine, it would have broader repercussions, I think, on the war, the civil war that we're seeing in Libya today. We had spent the day reporting that the fighting did begin that morning. We had spent the day going from the hospital to the front, interviewing residents in the town, and by about 4 or 4:30, we decided, we kept on hearing rumors that the government was in the town, that government troops were in the town, and we didn't think that was happening. We thought they were still coming from the west. It turned out that they had encircled the town, and as we were leaving to go back to Benghazi, probably within a couple of minutes, we hit that checkpoint that they had set up just minutes before. The photographer, Lindsay, she saw the checkpoint first, and she thought it was government. We weren't sure. And I have to say, it felt like minutes, but it was probably just seconds when we drove right into the checkpoint. We passed the first line of soldiers, and then the second line of soldiers, I think, recognized that some people in the car were foreigners. And our driver yelled "journalist," and at that point they pulled us out of the car, and almost instantly, as they pulled us out of the car, a gun battle unlike anything we'd ever seen erupted. Rebels attacked the checkpoint, and we basically ran for our lives at that point.
Talk about each of your colleagues, who they are, where they come from, and their work at the Times.
All of them are veterans. Lindsay Dario, she's a well-known photographer. Tyler Hicks, likewise, has spent a lot of time in South Asia and the Middle East. Steve Farrell is a videographer and reporter, and he has also we'd worked together in Iraq and elsewhere. He'd also spent quite a bit of time in Afghanistan. So, it was a group that, all pretty much the same age, and we'd covered a lot of the same stories in the past together. We all had probably a similar sense of the story, though I have to say, I think we were making different calls that day, and I think Lindsay's and Steve's calls were better than the ones that Tyler and I made. Because they said what? I think they were ready to leave earlier, and replaying these events over my head, I wish I had left earlier. You never know when to stop reporting. You never know when you have enough or feel that you have enough. There's always, I hate to put it this way, but there's probably always another anecdote or another, another interview you can do, somehow that's going to, make that story more understandable or more tangible. And, it's hard to say otherwise. I mean, I clearly made a mistake that day in staying too long, and by the time we got to the checkpoint, it was too late. So then talk about what happened. Who first took you? What happened at the checkpoint? There's that look, I think, there was a look, I think, in those soldiers' faces of just fear and rage as they saw us, and they pulled us out of the car. Like I said, the gun battle started immediately, and when we ran, Tyler ran first, and then I fell on a sand berm and got to my feet, and then I ran after him. And Tyler and Lindsay and Steve followed, and we got behind a kind of a concrete shack, basically, to take cover from the shooting. And the soldiers set upon us there. They emptied our pockets, slapped us, beat us, and forced us onto our knees. And then I think, again, I want to say it was minutes, but it was probably just seconds. They told us to get on our stomachs, to lay flat on our stomachs, and we all resisted. I mean, I think all of us had the idea that if we were going to get on our stomachs, we might be shot or executed. We resisted, and they forced us down. And I remember looking up, hearing, I remember him being a tall, lanky soldier saying, basically shoot them. And again, I'm sure it was just a matter of seconds, but it did feel like minutes. Another soldier, looked at him and said, you can't shoot them, they're Americans. And they soon after that, they tied our legs and our hands and threw us in 2 pickup trucks. And that kind of was the beginning of a 12-hour period where, I'd say every couple hours, every 3 hours, another gun battle, another fight with the rebels would start. We would pour out of the cars trying to take cover on the ground. And then by 2 a.m., they put us in a tank, drove us to another location, and that started a kind of a journey of 7 or 8 hours basically across the Libyan coast towards Sirte, where we were held in jail for a night.
And talk about who your captors were. Who were these soldiers, Anthony?
It was interesting, Amy, because I kept on hearing this, the soldiers refer to the doctor. And, pretty early on, you got a sense that it was more of a militia than an army. It was hard to identify any rank. Organization seemed a little bit haphazard. It was tough to see who was in charge or who wasn't in charge. And I kept on hearing this word, doctor. And then later on in the night, there was a reference to Dr. Mu'tasim, and this is one of Colonel Gaddafi's sons, considered, hardline or whatever that means. But and it did seem that militia was loyal to him. At the stop that they took us the next morning, it was made clear that we needed to be put in the hands of Mukhabarat, that they're going to put us in the hands of intelligence. And I think that was the reason for the journey to Sirte. Once we got to Sirte, which is a pretty strategic town for the government since it's Colonel Gaddafi's hometown, there was an effort to find out who we are, where we had come from, what we were doing. And then a decision by the next day was to take us to Tripoli, which we got to by a military airplane. I have to say that night in Sirte was one of the tougher ones because you did get you came up with the realization that no one knew who we were or where we had come from. At one point, I offered to my interrogator to transcribe our names in Arabic for him if he would take off the blindfold, and he refused. But it was a long night because you thought this might last much longer than it actually did.
Lindsay was the woman among the four of you. Talk about her experience.
That's right. She was. It was. The treatment was rough on her, I have to say, and she was repeatedly groped. She was hit in the face while she was blindfolded. She wasn't spared any of the beatings that we had. And I think there was a lot of fear on her part. I don't want to speak for her, but I think there was a lot of fear on her part of being separated from us. And, thankfully we were never separated. We were kept together at all times in the jail cell, in the car. And once we got to this kind of glorified detention center in Tripoli. But I think there was a lot of fear on Lindsay's part that of what might happen to her.
And talk about the changing of the guard in the week that you were held, that you were abused. Who were the different groups that were holding you, the handoffs?
I think that's a great question because it was really an insight, I thought, in some ways into how this government was organized. For 4 decades now, Colonel Gaddafi's been dedicated to this idea of a state of the masses, as he describes it. It's pretty much, at least theoretically, it's perpetual revolution, but I think what it's left behind really is the wreckage of a state. And we saw that wreckage of a state as we went from Ajdabia all the way to Tripoli. This was a militia that, if you looked hard, they didn't look all that much different from the rebels, except for better weapons and maybe better vehicles, or at least the vehicles were painted green. But if you took these individuals one-on-one, there wasn't much that differentiated them from the rebels they were fighting. When we got closer to Tripoli, though, you saw more of the semblance of a state. And it struck me back in 2003 in Baghdad, and I think also in 2011 in Tripoli, is as the state becomes more threatened, there's almost a tendency to kind of bolster the prestige of the state, or to focus on the prestige of the state. And I think that's what saved us in the end. There was a fight we overheard on the tarmac in Tripoli after we arrived on this military airplane. And from what I gathered, it was a fight between different branches of the government over who was going to take custody of us. Would it be the Interior Ministry, the Defense Ministry? In the end, it was a mix of the Defense Ministry and the Foreign Ministry, and I think I think our destinies were decided on that tarmac. Once we were in the hands of the Defense Ministry, they kept stressing to us that you're in the care of the state, you're in the protection of the state. I think it was a sad statement in some ways. On the one hand, it saved us because we became, in some ways, a diplomatic dispute that had to be resolved. I think in other ways, it just illustrated how, in some ways, I don't want to say hollow, but the way the insecurity, I think, within the state over the prospect that it's facing its last days.
Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Anthony Shadid describes the ordeal he went through with 3 of his New York Times correspondent colleagues in Libya.